Hello everyone! The first details about Natlan are finally here, and Mualani is one of the 3 new Natlan characters coming in patch 5.0. Similar to other Natlan characters, she has a very unique and mobile gameplay style, both in and out of combat. She looks to be the first forward vape-oriented Hydro DPS, as her kit is focused on doing only a few hits every rotation, with each hit dealing a lot of damage. And potentially, Mualani might be as good of a Hydro carry, or maybe even better, as Neuvillette. So let's get right into explaining her initial kit. As always, remember that this is very early information, so very subject to change. Before we talk about the kit, we must first talk about Nightsoul. Nightsoul is the special mechanic for all character kits of Natlan. All of their kits play around the Nightsoul mechanic, whether in or out of combat. Nightsoul also is required for the new Natlan artifact sets you will be using. So what does Nightsoul do? Nightsoul has 3 main features. First is Nightsoul Burst. All this does is that when you have Natlan characters on your team, whenever a Natlan character does elemental damage, this effect will trigger. The more Natlan characters you have on your team, the shorter the trigger interval. From what I've seen, just one Natlan character is enough to trigger this. Next is Nightsoul Blessing. This is the main effect of Nightsoul for Natlan characters, where the characters enter a special enhanced state to deal the majority of their damage. While in this enhanced state, the Natlan characters gain a special Nightsoul gauge where they can accumulate and spend Nightsoul points for extra damage, or just extend the duration of their enhanced state depending on the character. What Nightsoul Blessing does is unique for each Natlan character, so you'll have to look into their specific kits to know how it affects the character. The last aspect of Nightsoul is Nightsoul Transmission. This is an exploration feature. The Nightsoul enhanced states for each Natlan character can be used in the overworld for faster traveling. Nightsoul Transmission basically allows you to stay in this state longer and can unlock special exploration movement abilities while exploring the specific areas of Natlan. With a proper understanding of Nightsoul, let's talk about Mualani. Mualani is a 5-star Hydro Catalyst user that ascends with crit rate, and her base stats are shown here. Notably, her base HP is very high because Mualani is an on-field Hydro main DPS that scales solely off HP. Aside from being mobile, a feature that seems to be a trend for all these new upcoming Natlan characters, her gameplay is unique because she doesn't deal damage consistently, but through a couple very hard-hitting hits every rotation. Because of this, she is the first forward vape-oriented Hydro DPS in Genshin Impact. To understand how this works, let's go over Mualani's abilities. First, her normal talent. It has very cool animations. She throws fishes at enemies and is adorable. But other than that, you don't actually use Mualani's normal talent, so you can ignore this. Next, Mualani's elemental skill, which is the main part of her entire kit. When you use her skill, Mualani starts surfing on her shark and enters Nightsoul's Blessing, gaining increased move speed. This is her main way of exploration movement and can be used over water and Natlan's lava, but it is also her core combat gameplay as well. When entering this enhanced state, Mualani starts with 60 Nightsoul points. As she's surfing on her shark, these points will continually decrease. Once it hits 0, Nightsoul's Blessing ends and Mualani gets off her shark and the skill cooldown of 6 seconds begins. You can also press skill again to end this state early. While Mualani is surfing on her shark, her normal attacks become special hits called Sharky's Bite. These normal attacks are unique because you can only do one of these attacks every 2 seconds. Thus, she is not a DPS that does consistent attacks, but a DPS that performs a few hard-hitting attacks. To increase the damage of each Sharky's Bite, you'll need to do some surfing. When Mualani makes contact with an enemy, she marks them as prey and gets 1 wave momentum stack. 1 stack can be generated from the same enemy every 0.8 seconds. Each wave momentum stack increases the damage of Sharky's Bite and are consumed afterwards. Once you get the maximum of 3 stacks, Sharky's Bite becomes Sharky's Surging Bite and the damage is further increased. Adding everything up at talent level 10, at 3 stacks, this attack has a 130.2% HP scaling considered as normal attack damage. For a single attack, this is an insane HP multiplier. To imagine how this gameplay will work, you can think of Mualani surfing as Yelan's skill passing through enemies. You will move through the enemies until you get 3 wave momentum stacks, then press normal attack to perform your hard-hitting Shark Bite. A few extra things on Mualani's skill. With her A1 passive, when she performs a Sharky Surging Bite, a fish called a floater will spawn and return to her. Once Mualani picks it up, she gains 25 extra Nightsoul points. This passive ensures that you can fit 2 fully stacked Shark Bites within each skill usage. And lastly, Mualani's skill can fire shark missiles. Reading how these missiles work through the description can be very confusing, but with actual examples, this mechanic isn't too hard to understand. In single target, you don't get any missiles. In multi-target, let's say Mualani surfs between 3 targets, marking each of them as prey and gaining 3 wave momentum stacks. Mualani now has her super powerful Shark Bite normal attack, and she hits one of the enemies to deal 100,000 damage for instance. The prey mark on that one enemy and Mualani's stacks are consumed. However, there are 2 remaining prey markers on the 2 other enemies. enemies. This is where the shark missiles come in. A missile is spawned for each marked enemy, so in this example 2 of them, and 1 missile will hit a marked enemy. The damage of the missile is the same as the initial shark bite hit, so in this scenario, the other 2 enemies hit by the missiles will also take 100,000 damage. Thus, the shark missiles are Mualani's way of dealing AoE damage. Now, if either of her shark bites or missiles hit multiple enemies, the damage of the hit is decreased as a way of balancing her damage in AoE. With the example I brought up, in AoE, each hit did 100,000 damage. If you perform that same hit in single target, it would have done more, let's just say 120,000 damage for instance. But overall, you still get more total damage because you hit multiple enemies. The last important thing to note about Mualani's skill is her energy generation. She produces 5 particles from the first shark bite of each skill. So 5 particles per skill, same as Arlecchino, which is a very good amount of particles, meaning she doesn't have to worry about building energy recharge. With her skill explained, let's move on to her elemental burst. Thankfully, Mualani's burst is very simple when compared with her skill. It's just a nuke of AoE damage, 60 energy cost, 15-second cooldown, very simple. The damage of Mualani's burst can be increased through her A4 passive. With this passive, Mualani gains stacks of Wave Chaser's exploits every time Nightsoul burst is triggered, with each stack increasing the damage of her burst. Remember that Nightsoul burst is triggered when a Natlan character deals elemental damage. At the moment, it's unclear how many stacks Mualani herself can gain, but it's very likely that you won't be able to get the full stacks until more Natlan characters are released that can pair well with her inner teams. Lastly, the special passive talent. It seems like the special passive talent for all Natlan characters is purely exploration based. There are a lot of unfamiliar terms which we'll probably learn as we explore in 5.0, but the gist of it is that while exploring in Natlan, you can enter Nightsoul Blessing more for exploration by triggering Nightsoul Transmission, and you can unlock some special movement abilities while interacting with special mechanisms in Natlan. In Mualani's case, she also consumes less Nightsoul points when she's surfing on water and even less when surfing on water in Natlan. And that is Mualani's base kit in a nutshell. Talent priority is simple, skill over burst. My idea of a general gameplay rotation is this: support setup, then switch to Mualani and use her skill to enter Nightsoul's Blessing and start surfing. You surf on the enemy until you get 3 stacks, then normal tech to do your big hit. By collecting the floater spawned through her A1, you can do this again. Once her enhanced state is over, you can burst if you have it, then swap to one of your supports for an extra skill or to refresh something like VV, then switch back to Mualani to scale and do another 2 empowered attacks. Afterwards, you can also choose to burst here if you have it as well, then loop back to your supports. For some teams, you can shorten the rotation by just doing 1 skill uptime on Mualani per rotation. Next, let's cover her Constellations. C1 increases the damage of Mualani's first Sharky Surging Bite, her fully stacked attack, as well as any missiles this triggers. It also decreases her Nightsoul point consumption while not in combat, allowing you to surf longer in the overworld. C2 immediately gives Mualani 2 wave momentum stacks when she uses a skill and enters Nightsoul's Blessing. In addition, she can spawn an additional floater with her A1 every skill usage, and each floater collected also gives her 1 wave momentum stack. With the extra stacks and the increased enhanced state duration with that extra floater, you should be able to fit an extra fully stacked attack every skill usage. C3 increases her skill talent level by 3, C4 gives Mualani extra energy when collecting her A1 floater, as well as increase her burst damage, C5 increases her burst talent by 3, and lastly, C6 allows the extra damage given to her by her C1 to be applied to all of her attacks, not just the first one, as well as giving them extra crit rate and crit damage. Other than C4 and C5, she has pretty strong Constellations. Now let's cover Mualani's potential builds. For weapons, her signature is her general best in slot. Low base attack, which is fine because Mualani doesn't scale off attack, allowing for a lot of crit damage. The special passive gives extra HP and 48% normal attack damage bonus as long as she vapes attacks. If you don't vapor attacks, each attack will decrease this damage bonus, so in teams outside of vape, this weapon will perform worse. For other 5-star weapons, ideally they also have low base attack, so the only one I would really recommend is Neuvillette's signature. You don't take advantage of the charged attack bonus, but you still get a lot of crit damage and some HP. For 4-star weapons, you have a ton of options. The Battle Pass weapon, Sacrificial Jade, will be your best 4-star weapon. It gives crit rate, HP, and EM for vape, all great stats. Since Mualani ascends with crit rate and her best artifact set will also give crit rate, you will easily go over 100% crit rate with this weapon, but still, it's going to be very good. Another good option is Witsith for the crit damage. For its passive, just pray you don't get the attack percent buff. For free-to-play options, Prototype Amber is fine, however with the release of Natlan, there are better free-to-play options. First is the new event weapon, HP substats and an extra instance of damage scaling off of HP. A slightly better option is the new Natlan craftable catalyst, HP substat again, but this one increases normal attack damage based on your HP, which is great for Mualani. For artifact sets, at the start of 5.0, sets like Heart of Death or 2-piece sets are fine, however as a Natlan main DPS, you will want to use the new Natlan DPS set, Obsidian Codex. This set is only for characters utilizing the Nightsoul mechanic, aka only Natlan characters. And if you're a Natlan on-feeler like Mualani, you'll basically gain all of its effects, so 20% damage bonus on the 2-piece and 40% crit rate on the 4-piece. Very strong artifact set. For artifact stats, as an HP scaler, she builds similarly to Neuvillette. HP Hourglass, Hydro Damage or HP Goblin, Goblet, and Crit Circlet. With the amount of crit rate available, it will likely be a crit damage circlet. For substats, prioritize crit, EM for vape teams, HP percent, then ER. Because her skill generates 5 particles which Mualani will catch, and longer rotations can fit 2 skills in, her ER requirements are low. In addition, while Mualani's burst is a nice nuke of AoE damage, it is not that important when compared with the damage from her skill talent. Thus, you don't have to burst every rotation, and I would recommend not specifically building an ER and focus on damage stats. Finally, let's cover Mualani's potential teams. Mualani does a lot of hydro damage due to her high HP scaling, so you ideally want to put her in teams that amplify this hydro damage. For instance, vaporized teams are great for the 2x multiplier whenever you forward vape attacks. A good example is Mualani, Farina, Xiangling, and Bennett, and it looks to be a solid team. Another option is a more standard vape team with Mualani, Yelan or Mona, Xiangling, and Kazuha for VV. Keep in mind that this type of team is more for like one-shot showcases. Looking at some combat footage, although Mualani has some level of poise, she will really appreciate resistance to interruption from like a shield to ensure she doesn't get staggered out of any of her hard-hitting attacks. I did see Zajeh recommending Xinyan as an option with Kazuha, which is pretty cool as a potential use case. However, keep in mind that a big flaw with Xinyan is that she's Xinyan and she's just not a good character number-wise, such as her shield being relatively weak. For a safer vape option with defensive utility, you can go burn vape either with or without Farina, which has rooms for units like Zhongli or Baiju. And as long as you can keep up burning, you'll be vaping Mualani's hits. Similar to Kinich, in these vape teams, Mualani is reliant on Xiangling for consistent off-field pyro application, and because of Xiangling's high ER requirements, especially in single pyro, since you don't really want to use Bennett because Mualani doesn't scale off of attack, Xiangling does limit Mualani's teams. So I wouldn't be surprised if a new Natlan character with more accessible off-field pyro applications, such as the Pyro Archon, is released, making Mualani's vape teams better. If you don't want to worry about these vape setups and possible inconsistencies, mono hydro teams are another great option. You can pair her with Farina, Kazuha, and a hydro healer like Seedreen or Kokomi. Another option for a mono hydro team is running an animal healer to combine healing and VV, allowing an extra slot for someone like Kachina, who with her off-field damage can proc the new 4-piece Natlan support set via Crystallize to give 45% hydro damage bonus, which is huge. Lastly, there is potential to run her in a Nulu Bloom team. She does deal a good amount of damage by herself with her scalings. However, you don't get any buffs for her in these teams, so she's mainly there just for the base damage and hydro app for blooms, which in my opinion doesn't really fully take advantage of her multipliers. And that's everything I wanted to cover on Mualani. Because she's a hydro main DPS that scales solely off HP, the closest comparison that she has is Neuvillette. The main discussion going around is whether or not Mualani power creeps and is better than the Hydro Sovereign. And after going through the discussions and early calculations in theory crafting communities, I think the most logical answer to this question is yes and no. If we look at some of the early calculations on Mualani, they are very high. The ones shown here are done by Jster in his community. Highly recommend checking him out. For reference, 60k DPS and up is pretty solid in my opinion, and above 70k is likely top tier. Mualani's sheet DPS kind of blows these numbers out of the water. Neuvillette does not come close, and realistically there are several units like Arlecchino and Huta who do already sheet higher than Neuvillette. However, there are some big caveats with any of these calcs on Mualani. First, obviously pre-release calcs are always just pre-release, so take them with a grain of salt until they can be verified with actual gameplay. Secondly, the sheet DPS shown will very likely not translate over to in-game practical DPS. This is because Mualani only relies on 5 instances of damage per rotation, 4 enhanced normals and her burst, and if you do a shorter rotation with just 1 skill usage on Mualani, then it gets reduced to 3. If you miss an enhanced normal or just don't vape it or crit those hits, you're going to lose a lot of damage. But most importantly, she is very prone to overkilling enemies. If Mualani's fully stacked Shark Bite does 300,000 damage and the enemy has 200,000 health, then 100,000 damage is wasted. If that 300,000 damage wasn't enough and the enemy still has like 25% HP, then you have to commit a second attack to fully kill the enemy, which is a big deal since you only get a few attacks from Mualani every rotation. And lastly, Mualani does have gameplay clunkiness. The gameplay of surfing on the enemies and waiting for 3 stacks before launching one singular attack will be awkward to play, and that can be a deal breaker for characters. With Neuvillette, you know you'll be getting easy gameplay with consistent damage from his Hydro Pump. That doesn't make Mualani bad, however. Her damage is very high due to her scalings, and I think it should be like this. Due to the bursty nature of her damage and awkward gameplay, just like in high risk, high reward scenarios, she does kinda warrant the high sheet DPS shown. So if you don't care about Mualani's gameplay clunkiness and value her nuke potential such as versus bosses, then Mualani can be considered better than Neuvillette. If you value Neuvillette's consistent damage, easy access to AoE, and his very easy and comfortable gameplay, then Neuvillette can be considered better than Mualani. But ultimately, both characters are looking to be top tier, so just pick the one you like more. Mualani already looks very strong, and she is only going to get better as more Natlan characters are released in the future. There have been news suggesting that she will be getting a slight nerf in the next beta patch, so we'll just have to see how Hoyo changes Mualani in the upcoming weeks. I hope this initial overview and analysis of Mualani's kit was helpful to y'all. Leave any questions in the comments and I'll try to clarify anything. Drop the video a like or sub to the channel if you like this type of content. I also recently made a Discord server, so if you want to ask me any more specific questions, feel free to join and chill. And with that, I hope you all are excited about what Natlan has to offer.